What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back in the video. Today we're going round by round talking about my pick for the most likely player to bust in every round. I'll be comparing my rankings to a combination of Fantasy Pros ECR and ADP, which I'll be calling average ADP for the video. So if I ever say average ADP, that means the average between ADP and Fantasy Pros ECR right now, just to try and get a really good ADP to compare. Also, I'm not always going to pick the player I have ranked behind ADP or behind average ADP the most. I'm going to be trying to do like a combination of who do I have that the case with, but also just like really just thinking about what the path is to every player busting and just trying to identify who I think the riskiest pick is in every round. So let's start things off in round one with Saquon Barkley. Average ADP is 8th overall. I have him ranked 15th overall right now, and we're doing half PPR ADPs, half PPR for my rankings. He is also the only player in round one that I have more than 2 spots different, whether that's above ADP or behind ADP. Everyone's like pretty accurate in the first round. I just don't think Saquon is. Now, I don't actually think the risk of him like holding out is super high this season. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense for him to hold out. It doesn't seem like the path that he's most likely to take right now, but whenever that risk is present in round one, obviously that is a big concern. But really, it's just that like there are so many amazing players going behind him that even if he has a good season, I think amongst everyone in the first round, like he'd have to have a really, really good season to be worth that mid-first round ADP when you think about all the players going after him. Tyreek Hill, Jonathan Taylor, Diggs, Nick Chubb, Lamb, AJ Brown, like he goes ahead of all of those players, and maybe like, that entire list doesn't finish ahead of him, but like there are a lot of players on that list that I would very much prefer on my team over Saquon. There's also the risk that Darren Waller just commands a larger target share than like the Giants' top wide receivers last season. That could limit Saquon's reception upside on his potential touchdown ceiling as well. So I like him on Underdog when he's going in the late second round, not super pumped about a mid-first round ADP in redraft leagues. And round two, my pick is Breece Hall. He actually has an average ADP of 24th overall. That's right at the end of round two. My ranking, he is 30th. And honestly, like I definitely can't envision taking him, top 25 like he's going right now. But I don't even love taking him like at my current ranking. Like I prefer only drafting Breece Hall if he's going to fall really far in the draft. He becomes a massive value. He's sitting there and I'm like, okay, now how do I not take him, right? He's there at like 35, 37. I'm like, this is really, really good value. Top player in the ranking. Fell a ton by ADP. Then I'll go after him. But at the end of the second round, I don't know. I just don't like that. And that hasn't been happening as much either. Like he doesn't really typically fall in drafts. We still really don't know where he's at with his recovery. That makes him a very risky pick. And so if you're looking at round two, I always say in the top like 3 rounds, you should love everything about a player. You should feel like the only way they bust is through an injury, right? But like he's recovering from an injury. And so like most players are healthy. And it's okay if they suffer a new injury, that's the only way. I mean, do we really know if he's going to be 100% to start the season? Even if he's 100%, do we know the team's not going to like ease him in over the first month or two, give him limited touches? We just don't know these things. And like, there's so much risk there that in round two, everyone else is a really, really good pick. I think that's a little bit too risky. Good chance of busting if he's going to start the season, limited. Round three, my pick is Ken Walker. Average ADP is 35th. So that's the end of round three. My ranking is 50th. I'm just a believer in the talent of Zach Charbonnet. I think that also Kenny McIntosh is a really good receiving back. He could earn some third down snaps. I do think Ken Walker is going to have a very large role, especially on early downs. And I think Ken Walker is a really good player. But Charbonnet, could absolutely eat into some of that early down workload as the season goes on. He's definitely a better receiving back. And with Walker being, like the third best receiving back on his own team, that's fine if he was going in round 5. Like if you're going in round 5 and you're only an early down back, totally fine. Even if some of those early down snaps are being taken away from you, like that's totally fine. In round 3, for you to tell me that like he needs effectively multiple running backs to get injured to ever get any sort of like receiving role in the team. Plus, to hit his normal ceiling, he probably also needs Charbonnet to get hurt because Charbonnet is going to also take not only the third down snaps, passing down snaps, but going to mix it on early downs as well, mix in at the goal line too. Like, if he needs that to happen, that's fine in round 5. It's not fine in round 3. You should never be drafting a player in round 3 who needs their backup to get injured to really pay off the ADP. So I love the player. It's just like, it's a tough situation expecting him to exceed value in round 3. Again, I want the only path to busting the first 3 rounds to be through injury. That's not the case for Ken Walker. In round 4, my bust prediction is DJ Moore. Average ADP is 47th. My ranking is 59th. We know that the Bears are going to be a very, very low volume passing attack. And while DJ Moore is obviously the number 1 wide receiver, I just don't see a path to a lot of volume for DJ Moore. Justin Fields had over 23 pass attempts only 3 times last season. Like, try to wrap your head around that level of volume. He threw the ball 24 or more times, only 3 games. In only 3 games last season, Atlanta Falcons, they threw the ball the second fewest times per game among any team, right? Everyone knows they ran the ball a ton. They still averaged 24.5. So they averaged more than what Fields hit in only 3 games last year. And looking ahead to this season, I mean, they'll probably increase their pass attempts, but it won't be by that much. They're still going to be probably bottom 3, maybe bottom 1 in the league. So even if DJ Moore were to dominate the target share, he's not going to have that many double-digit target games, right? And Justin Fields, being a below average completion percentage quarterback, I mean, DJ Moore is going to need double-digit targets to try and get over to 6, 7 receptions. I just think there's going to be a ton of games where DJ Moore has 4 or 5 receptions for around 60 yards, not a lot of touchdowns, and at a 4th round ADP, that opens up a lot of risk that he ends up being a bust. If he only gets to 5 or 6 touchdowns, and most weeks he's at 4 for 50, 5 for 60, that's not super valuable, and you're drafting him either to be your wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2, and I don't see the ceiling. I see a very, very big risk that he hits kind of a floor expectation people are expecting, even again if he's number 1 on his own team. Round 5, my pick is George Kittle. Kittle had 2, 5, 5, 2, and 6 touchdowns over his first 5 seasons in the NFL, and then he spiked to 11 last season, despite 4-year lows in yards per reception, receptions per game, receiving yards per game, catch rate, yards per target. He was wildly inefficient last season, but it was the touchdowns. He just was really hot towards the end of the season. We know touchdowns are very, very random in the NFL. You never want to follow touchdowns. He was the tight end 9 in points per game through week 14. And then tight end 1 by a mile in the last 4 weeks of the season. Through week 13, he had the same number of games under 30 receiving yards as he did over 30 receiving yards, and he had 4 total touchdowns. For the vast majority of the season, he was producing a late round tight end, and then he had 4 good games. And then I don't believe in the 3 playoff games he did really anything. So I'm not willing to spend a 5th round pick on him when, there are truly elite quarterbacks, wide receivers going in that same range that I have a ton of confidence in. He hasn't been fantastic the 2 years leading up to last season, and then last season he still only had 4 good games. No, I'm not spending a 5th round pick on that. My pick for the biggest bust in round 6 is DeAndre Swift. Average ADP 64th. That's the early 6th round. My ranking 84th. And I don't know how we can justify taking him this early. They definitely like Kenneth Gainwell. He's going to have a role, especially on passing downs. But regardless, even if you're no, Swift takes all the passing down snaps, sure, that's not even a valuable role on the Eagles. All the value for Eagles running backs comes in the red zone with carries. That's all of the value. It's an exceptionally valuable role when you're inside the 10-yard line even, getting running back carries. But between the 20s with targets, it's not a valuable role on the Eagles. And if we look at why Swift is not in Detroit anymore, it's because he couldn't handle those specific touches that are valuable on the Eagles. And by drafting him in round 6, you're saying that he is going to win the goal line job and that he is going to stay healthy in that role. And that's just not a bet that I'm willing to make. I don't think that'll be his role. I don't think his role is going to be as valuable as people expect this season. In round 7, biggest bust pick is George Pickens, average ADP 82nd, my ranking 86. So not too far off, but my hesitation with Pickens is that, like, number one, Deontay Johnson's still going to be a target hog. He's a great wide receiver. He's going to get a ton of targets. Number 2, we've got Pat Freiermuth, a great receiving tight end. And so when you think about the target share, like, ceiling for Pickens, it can only be so high. Then you consider, well, the Steelers are going to run the ball a lot this season. And so there's going to be plenty of games where they have a very low pass attempt total. And so you've got Pickens kind of capped at a specific target share. Like, he really just can't get too high in target share with Pat Freiermuth, with Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, Deontay Johnson, like all of them on the team. It can only be so high. And then you think back to last season, you're like, okay, well, I guess the path out is touchdowns, right? Like, even if the target share isn't high, if he can have a downfield role and if he can rack up touchdowns, that's great. But remember last season when Deontay Johnson was, like, historically inefficient with touchdowns? Well, that would have been the year where Pickens would have spiked, right? But he only had 4. And what I always go back to with players is I want to draft you saying, like, if you get unlucky with touchdowns, I still think you can pay off your ADP. With Pickens, it's like, I think he needs to get lucky with touchdowns to pay off his ADP. The downside risk is that he, again, has like 3 or 4 touchdowns. He ends up as a very low-end receiving talent, and we're taking that in round 7 when there are still awesome receivers on the board. That's a no-go for me. Round 8, my pick is Brian Robinson. That one just feels easy, to be honest. I mean, Robinson's a 0 in the receiving game. New offensive coordinator seems to actually like Antonio Gibson, which is a shift from last season when they, for some reason, hated him. They drafted Chris Rodriguez, who I don't think is going to have a role immediately in the season, but I think once we get like halfway through and into the end of the season, I think he's going to push for a role on early downs, and they did really like him in the draft. They had a 3rd-round grade on him. I just don't see the upside for Brian Robinson. If he's going to have a ton of 0-reception games, like, he legitimately needs 20-plus carries to do anything, and then sometimes that still isn't enough. Sometimes he has 21 carries, turns it into like 80 rushing yards, no touchdowns, no receptions. That's 8 points. Like, even in standard scoring, that's not fantastic. There are going to be a lot of games like that. And if we take a lot of those games where he has 20 carries and we bump them down to like 14 or 15, I mean, now he 100% needs a touchdown to score, and it's like, or to like have a really good game. And how many touchdowns do we really think he's going to have on the Commanders, who are not an offense we're expecting a lot of good things from this season? So easy one there. I think he's going to bust this season. In round 9, we have Damien Harris, who has actually seen his ADP like slowly rise as of late. People are gaining more confidence in him. You all know last week I talked about my machine learning model. It's predicting that James Cook is going to have a breakout season. So like naturally, I'm just not going to like Damien Harris, the other running back on that offense. But there are also just reports that like Harris isn't even a lock to beat out Latavius Murray, which is pretty embarrassing for Harris. To be fair, Latavius Murray is a player that coaches really like. He's always able to stay healthy. He just kind of does everything okay, and I think coaches are just comfortable putting him out there. But like, you should be able to beat out Latavius Murray, right? At this point of Murray's career, you should be able to beat him out. And so if we're kind of questioning that right now, that's not fantastic. Also, Buffalo was bottom 4 in red zone fantasy points to running back last season, since they throw at such a high rate in the red zone. And then also Josh Allen just steals rushing touchdowns on scrambles. And so if Harris is going to be splitting early down snaps, going to be relatively uninvolved in the receiving game on a team with minimal red zone usage for running backs, yeah, there's obviously a chance that he's going to turn into a massive bust this season. In round 10, I think you have to call it Michael Thomas round for who's going to bust. I actually have him ranked like right at his ADP. And I don't think he's like a bad pick when we just think about like the value you can return with a 10th round pick. Because now we're in the double-digit rounds. Now we're, it's much less likely that like players are going to break out, that they're going to return value. You got much more busts from this point on. But that doesn't take away from the fact that like Michael Thomas is incredibly risky, right? I mean, he hasn't had over 450 receiving yards in a season since 2019. He's missed 40 of the Saints' last 50 games with a number of different injuries. Like, the Saints now have a true number 1 wide receiver, Chris Olave. They've got a new quarterback that's not just going to like pepper Thomas with a million 5-yard slants. Like, there is downside risk here that not only that like, he just can't stay healthy at this point of his career, but that like his target share is significantly lower than we expect. But also that like at this point of his career, he just can't get downfield. Like he just can't win downfield. And so everything has to be close. And if you have everything close, but he has like a 30% target share, that's fine. But if it drops down to like 18% or something like that, well, now we're taking away all upside. Most weeks he's having like 5 for 50. I don't think he's going to have a million touchdowns this season. And so I understand it's intriguing, but a now 30 years old Michael Thomas, I mean, that's very obviously a big risk. Round 11, most likely player to bust is Jerick McKinnon. Not only does he have just a 0% chance of being the lead back on this team right now, but he's 31 years old now. He hasn't eclipsed 320 rushing yards since 2017. And he's coming off a season where he got unbelievably lucky with touchdowns. Clyde is now back healthy. Pacheco's likely the number one. Rookie Deneric Prince, he's performing really well in camp. And so there's a very real chance that McKinnon just has no role on this team this season. But best case scenario is that he's sometimes brought in for third down snaps. He's not going to have many touches. Huge chance of busting this season. Round 12, my pick is Adam Thielen. He's just been dust in recent years. He's seen his yards per target drop in 5 straight seasons. He hit 3-year lows last season in catch rate, receptions per game, yards per game, touchdowns. Now he transitions from Kirk Cousins, who's a really good quarterback, to a rookie at age 33. So the outlook is not fantastic for Adam Thielen. I think Adam Thielen's going to be on free agency in most leagues after the first month. In round 13, my pick is Kenny Pickett. As I alluded to before, I think the Steelers are going to run the ball a ton this season, but on top of that, I'm just not convinced that Pickett is a high-end quarterback talent. I don't think he's ever going to be, some amazing starter in the league. And I also just don't see the point of drafting him. Not only, again, we're in round 13. Everyone here has a huge chance of busting. But why would you even draft Kenny Pickett? In no world are you ever competing with teams that have Mahomes, Hurts, Allen, Lamar, Fields, Burrow, Trevor Lawrence. That makes up likely more than half of your league that you just can't compete with at the quarterback position. But even after that, there's 8 to 10 more quarterbacks that Pickett is super unlikely to ever compete with. And so I get that he has a lot of weapons around him, but take Stafford 1 round earlier. Take Anthony Richardson 2 rounds earlier. Take Geno Smith 3 rounds earlier. There's just so many quarterbacks that are actually really good picks this season that you're really going to wait for Kenny Pickett, even taking him as your quarterback too. Why? You're just wasting a bench spot. There's just no world where he turns into a high-end fantasy starter that I don't see it. I don't see it ever happening for him this season, and honestly, even in the future. And round 14, most likely player to bust is Hunter Renfrow. He could honestly be cut by the Raiders this summer, which would definitely make him a bust. But even if he isn't, Adams is the clear number one. Jacoby Myers is just a better receiver than Hunter Renfrow. They also really like Trey Tucker. They want to get him on the field, which has kind of led into this talk about cutting Renfrow. But if they don't, it's he's the number 3, kind of rotating into that number 3 spot. It's just, there's no upside. And he's really just another player that I would expect to see on free agency after a month. Then finally, most likely player to bust in round 15, Chase Claypool. Not only does he have that same volume concern as DJ Moore, but he's apparently having an awful offseason. He just can't find his way onto the practice field. He's not playing that well. I just don't think that Claypool is draftable right now. He's a complete waste of a late round pick, kind of like Kenny Pickett is. You want to be drafting players who have upside. I don't really honestly care that much about the floor for late round picks, but at least have the upside. And many of the players in this range are going to bust anyways. So why not take a player who could literally score 0 points this season, but has a chance to be, a wide receiver too. But there's no chance you're ever starting Chase Claypool on a championship team this season. And so if that's the case, why draft him? He's at absolute best, the wide receiver 2 on one of the lowest volume, potentially lowest volume passing offenses in the NFL, but he is probably the 3rd or 4th receiving option on the lowest volume team in the NFL. There is no way you'd ever be starting him. Do not draft him. So those are my picks for the biggest bust in every single round. If you want to see my exact rankings and projections for every scoring format, you can see that at my website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. I'll be back tomorrow to go over the biggest ADP changes over the last 2 weeks. Sunday, go over another optimal underdog strategy. And then Monday for another episode of Mock Draft Monday. That, my friends, is in this one. Hope you all enjoyed. If you did, how about hitting the like button and how about subscribing to the channel if you're new here. Thanks for watching.